Hello and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for May 22nd, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. It's been a little while. It's episode 218. I have with me the great pleasure of having Dexter White back on the podcast. We're going to discuss a lot of interesting developments in domestic politics. Dexter, how are you?
I'm
What's going
good.
on, man?
There's nothing going on. What are you talking about? I'm just here harvesting tumbleweeds in South Florida, which we have so many of.
Which you have plenty of down there.
But the nice sea breeze, blows the seagrass tumbleweeds across the highway, and I chase them. It's fun.
Yeah, it's funny. I've just spent most of the time since I got back from Calgary, just like picking weeds in my yard. And
there you go.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess there's nothing to talk about.
So thank you all for tuning in, folks. Seriously, I don't know about you, but I just got back from, we spent a little bit of time up in Calgary with Sean Newman and the crew in Alberta, which was very interesting. And I spent a little extra time up there to get some R&R and some time off. And I know that people have been screaming at me to like do something. There's like the little stick figure thing. Tom, do something. I'm like, I'll get back to it, dudes. So
yeah,
actually, what did you want?
That's something being vacate. That's something being take a break.
I was like, yeah, I was like, I was looking at mountains and driving around, and
But here's the crux of the problem. You can't even talk about taking a break without making it like an active verb process. You just like you do like relax. What does that mean? I have to go do the relaxing.
Are you kidding? My idea of relaxing was doom scrolling my Twitter feed and and being a dick. Okay, so what else?
Also known as Tuesday.
Tuesday, exactly. Every day, and that ends in a Y. So speaking of, today is Thursday morning. So what is happening on this actual Thursday morning? So we stopped filibustering and beating this Jon Stewart-esque joke into the ground.
Let me just make sure that Israel hasn't launched World War III. I did not actually look yet.
No, I didn't see it on Zero Hedge this morning, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, no, I mean that was the big thing yesterday that was allegedly going to happen. Nothing that's different than yesterday. Yeah, it was also just thanks to all the people in Calgary who came out to the member meetup. It was great meeting y'all in person. And thanks to Sean Newman for just putting on a great conference. That was truly top-notch stuff. So just that, I want to say that. Yeah, so right now we're in the midst of the full frame denial of Biden's obvious and long time obvious mental decline. And then we have the recent dropping of the totally believable spontaneous stage 5 cancer / stage 4. But they're trying to teach people the Gleason scale for some reason. Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. That's all I got. What's your take on how believable this all is?
Zero. I'm known for saying there are very few zero probability events in this life, but this is one of them that approaches at least 0% asymptotically. Look, I don't know much about prostate cancer, but I do know that, man of Biden's age should have been throwing elevated PSA levels a while ago. Should have been, I don't know much about this stuff, but I know that this is clearly something that they knew about. And I would argue, and I think, you and I've talked about this a little bit, you would argue that they knew about that there was something wrong with him when they ran him in 2020. And I think that may be the thing we want to start with this. Like, let's look at the timeline, of the progression of this. Right.
I mean, I will say this. I've read up a little more on so there really is a stage 0 in cancer. So when people say it's stage 4 is the 5th stage, but it's ridiculous anyway. But on a lot of pathology, like it's this grade 9 basically means half the cells are like, I don't remember how the grading works, but like you add up like how many 4s and 5s you have to get. And this is a different scale, but the bottom line is what they've announced is you can only get one worse thing than what they announced, which would be grade 10, but it's meaninglessly worse. It's just
Right.
it's just how many of the breakout metastasized cells are, versus the ones that are trailing behind. Anyway, the idea that the president of the United States, who we believe has some decent healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
um, would not have had an elevated PSA at the very least. Now, I was struggling to remember if he'd ever had a biopsy,
Hmm.
um, a prostate biopsy. I feel like I remember it. I mean, I don't know if I'm confusing like Lloyd Austin or whatever,
Right.
because he had a radical prostatectomy, I believe. Whatever. Um, it's it's the only thing I'll say in Biden's defense, is that yeah, some late stage cancers can be misjudged on biopsy and slightly, you know, but that's, I mean, we're talking a less than 1%, um, not probability, but just less than 1% of the cases are going to meet that description. Like
Mm-hmm.
99 out of 100 are going to at least be leaving breadcrumbs with elevated PSAs, and not like PSAs of 4. Like this guy would have had a PSA in like the 30s, 50s, hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, it's unambiguously a problem, and every urologist is going to want to stick a needle in it. So whatever they did, here's a question: like, what do you and I and the average person believe about the White House doctor? I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what I believe today, but I can tell you what I believed like 2 weeks ago, which is like they're in touch with somebody in the military. Like, because every time the president has a procedure, gets sick, they send him over to a military hospital, right?
Mm-hmm.
Technically, because it's at Walter Reed Medical Center is where
Right.
they always send the president. So I had some fantasy, I guess, of like, oh, there's a team and blah blah blah. But when you think back to like the hippie Do long hair dude that Trump trouted out, like to be like, oh, he's the healthiest president ever. You start to realize there's some latitude here, and like maybe the White House physician really is just answering to the president.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're looking at. I mean, that's the only explanation, is that they clearly had some information related to prostate cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would bet there was some form of treatment, and that they've been sitting on this, frankly. And I apologize for being cynical if you're new to the show, but to me, the cancer was their ace in the hole, and I
Mm-hmm.
can talk a little bit about why I think that.
Sure.
I,
Please
I
do.
think I think it blew up on them in that the most charitable I can be is that excuse me, the ace in the hole, like they didn't think he had bone mets,
Right.
probably. I mean, a lot of people will tell you, oh, prostate cancer is so manageable and blah blah blah, and it is, in stage 2. Stage 4, when it's metastasized all over the body, is not manageable.
Right.
It's not even treatable except with palliative care. So um yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. You and I just to remind myself back when you were thinking about it, I'm like, how do men in this day and age like die of prostate cancer in this? It's like we think back to Frank Zappa, right? Just like this first thing that pops into my head. How did why did Frank have to die of prostate cancer? Because he didn't catch it until he was in stage
Late
4.
diagnosis for Frank. I mean, that
Sure.
was, and that's the way this happens normally, is like somebody shows up at the VA who hasn't seen a doctor in 10 years, and he's got stage 3 prostate cancer, and they biopsy it, and they're like, oh fuck. And then, it can be fast growing in the end. So it's not implausible that they thought they had a stage 2 prostate cancer and they just were wrong like a year ago, and then it got away from them. That's plausible, but like I said before, pretty low probability. And listen, it just contradicts with, look, what I admit is an assumption is that the president gets really good health care. And like annoyingly good, like too many tests. that's my assumption, right? Like that's what I would think the president's like healthcare experience. And maybe that's untrue, especially because we do know now that President Biden was surrounded by a coterie of family members who were basically concealing his mental decline. And if, since that was the ultimate mission, maybe this fell through the cracks, or maybe it was their ace in the hole. And I'll explain that a little later.
Sure. No, I think I think that's fair, right? That you have a situation with him where, and I by the way, I don't want to let go the point that of the irony that they made such a big deal about Trump's health during the campaign, and that back in 2020, and that Biden would release all of his health records and be 100% transparent with us, and blah 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 blah. And Rachel Maddow, Adam's apple, quivered about this, and everybody it was insane. And now we have this.
There are two meta narratives slash goals on the left right now. The first
Mm-hmm.
is selling us this lie that they were as shocked as we were when his debate performance occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my God, this is just a surprise. Like, okay.
All
And then
right.
the other thing is teeing up this sudden come to Jesus level of concern about the president's mental health so that they can pull this shit on Trump. Like they're going to want to pass a law that says the president has to go to a Democrat neurologist every week and get a check off, and if not, he's immediately like thrown out of office. And they're going to be like, "See, they're blocking what they say they want." Like that's like prepare yourself, folks, because that's what's coming.
Oh,
Their
thanks.
absurdity knows no bounds. Like,
Right.
be prepared. Um, so let me just I would say a lot of the current week's chum in the water kind of came out from Jake Tapper's book, Original Sin. And he, like, that book really pissed off the left, because Tapper, sort of unbelievably so, but he basically, I listened to the Megyn Kelly interview yesterday,
Mm.
um, and it was brutal. Like she definitely reamed him, but she had on both him and Alex Thompson of Axios is the co-author. Jake is the lead, and Alex gets the and. So they wrote it together, and Thompson had kind of an idea for this for a Biden book, and then it got withdrawn. And so he was sitting on a bunch of notes. Tapper was sitting on a bunch of notes. They talked, and then they realized that after the election, and um, a lot of people who weren't willing to talk, either not even on the record for direct quote, but they got a lot of people to talk to them for this book. So they realized they had a book, and they have a book. So great. Um, this book's made the left, enraged, because it now lays bare that, there was a cover up, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And that has a lot of problematic implications for where we are. Now, I've said here on this podcast and in print before, for a while, that Biden didn't have the mental capacity to be president. And there was clearly, a cabal of people running our country that were unelected. I stand by that assertion. I'll read you something I wrote in July of 2021. Quote, back at the Biden White House, the dance goes on. As the senile ice cream man is sent out to botch his lines for as long as the Aricept will allow, his administration will be pulling the strings in the background. I guess we should be thankful that they only feel emboldened enough to pull back the curtain and not fully open the raincoat. So, for those of you that don't speak sarcasm, I'll walk you through. Aricept is a drug that they give to people with Alzheimer's, and pulling back the curtains a reference to the Wizard of Oz, and opening the raincoat is something I hope is self-explanatory. But the idea is that they've been mocking us for a long time with this, and when they had Jen Psaki and all the other people in the administration just rubbing our faces in this stuff, this humiliation ritual of pretending we don't see the fact that the president is, diminished capacity. I mean, it's just the emperor's new clothes. It's a variety of the Soviet story where they say, oh, they lie, we know they lie, they know we we know they lie, and yet they continue to lie, right? Um, and that is something that needs to be called out. And every single person who was in the administration, and I'm not willing to say, oh, well, from 23, it became obvious. No, no, no. It was obvious early on. It was obvious before he was elected. It was obvious when they didn't let him campaign and blamed it on COVID while they were simultaneously exaggerating COVID so that they could get lockdowns, so that they could use absentee ballots. So Biden, who is the most popular president in American history, that resonates with so many people, got 80 million votes. Something that neither Trump nor his opponent got in this election. Like hello.
Right. Right.
So
you want us to believe, you literally want us to believe the most patent bullshit that you have ever placed in front of us. And the Biden administration, or the Biden junta, as I like to call it, was a 4-year struggle session. That's all it was. And you're going to eat this, and you're going to like it, and this is your shit sandwich, and this is your daily ration of shit, and you get to eat it, and that's it. And if you don't like it, well, don't eat. Like, well, a lot of Americans are obese, so maybe they should do a 3-day fast of political bullshit, and then go on with their life. I'll just continue that metaphor for as long as I can. By the way, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just back to sort of the Megyn Kelly interview
Sure.
with Tapper and Thompson. The another thing that I was very disturbed by was the reporting on the cabinet meetings, and without citation by name, Tapper claims to have spoken to 4 cabinet secretaries for this book on the record, but not for attribution. So 4 members of the cabinet sat down with Jake Tapper and basically said the president was, one, shielded from them in general. Like it was very low contact. Like this administration was like no other administration. Like when a cabinet member doesn't see the president for a year, that is highly abnormal. Because like 2 reasons. There's no general cabinet meetings in the Biden administration. Like, and when they happen, they're these scripted events with Jill Biden, Dr. Jill present and basically presiding, and Hunter, a guy with no security clearances. Not that cabinet meetings are like classified things. I mean, we let the press into some of them, but obviously there's cabinet meetings where we don't let the press in. And they discuss things that, are probably classified or at least are not public information. And apparently both Jill Biden and Hunter were at these meetings, which is ridiculous. But more to the point, we have 4 cabinet members who did not do their duty under the 25th Amendment. Now, that doesn't carry a penalty per se, because there's no penalty in the 25th Amendment for them not taking it on. But one, I mean, Megyn Kelly implies that if one of these 4 runs for office in the future, that Tapper needs to call them out in public. And she got that on the record, which I thought was very creative of her, because it is true that, if somebody allowed let's just say a non-qualified person to play the role of placeholder president while non-elected people decided what the nation's business was, that person too should be disqualified from being president, because that is frankly as fundamental a violation of the oath of office as you can have, other than being a true, traitor working with our enemies. But, when you want to uphold the Constitution and then you allow, I mean, the oath, by the way, for cabinet secretaries is very similar. They're also sworn to uphold the Constitution. And I'm sorry, like allowing a senile man to be a placeholder president while non-elected people do our nation's business, that is not upholding the Constitution, full stop. So, I mean, these are things that we presumed for many years. Like I wrote what I quoted before in 2021, but like that was just where I first used the phrase senile ice cream man in print. That's all
Right.
that was. I just searched my hard drive for that phrase and okay, that's the oldest issue. But it's not like we weren't talking about it before the election. And it's not because we're such super geniuses. Like it's everybody saw this. And now we're being told, oh, you didn't see that. It was the debate. It's a big surprise. And it's like, this is not, this can't be tolerated. I mean, I took some notes here on like the full arc of Biden's, you know, presidency and vice presidency. Like, I'd like to remind everybody that when Obama picked Biden to be vice president, excuse me, there were a great number of people who were stupefied by it because Biden was a fucking idiot. And this was when he was a mentally competent idiot. Biden has said dumb shit his whole life. Now, maybe that's because he had his head opened a couple of times in the 70s for 2 brain surgeries. But frankly, if you listen to him, I mean, he's been in office a long time, and if you listen to him, and at any time, he's never been smart. And Obama picked him because he was a white guy who was, a establishment Democrat to say the least. Was a little on the left, side of the Democrats for sure, but was pretty, he was in this left centrist channel, and he had some white appeal, I guess. But more to the point, he was not part of any of the factions that Obama knew he was going to be fighting. Biden wasn't a Clintonista. He wasn't one of those people, and so there he goes. And then basically Obama, during both of Obama's terms, I mean, let's be serious. Biden was minimized. He was stuck over there in the Naval Observatory, swimming naked and sexually harassing Secret Service personnel, as far as we have been told.
Right.
And then, historically, when a two-term president, is finishing up, the vice president of the 2 terms, usually that's the way it is, runs for president, right? That's the standard
Right.
model. Unfortunately, Beau Biden died. And as far as everybody, and this is believable, like Joe Biden was really torn up over this to the point where he couldn't handle running for president. And Obama supported that decision, as anybody would. I mean, it's like, okay, we get it. You're not ready. You can't do it. And that's even assuming Obama thought Biden had the chops to be president, which on many occasions he said he did not.
Right.
The famous quote that people might remember is never underestimate Joe's ability to fuck things up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to leave out the whole Hillary debacle because, we all know what happened there. It is an interesting question, though, is how much was Hillary sucked into a vacuum? And were there other things? Because I don't know. I'm going to my grave assuming that Obama's first choice was not having Hillary run
Yeah.
after his terms.
Yeah. That's fair.
And that's a conversation for another time, but
Sure.
I'm intractable on that one. However, we get Biden 2020. Like, obviously, we have the first Trump term. Boom. But then we get Biden 2020, the phoenix from the ashes. And yet, once they pull all the bullshit they pull, who's in his inner circle? Anita Dunn, Susan Rice, Val and Valerie Jarrett. Sorry. And so Obama's got his hands in this term a lot. And when I think about the breakdown mid-campaign, okay, so the debate is the wrench in the works, right? Like, they think they can pull off this Emperor's New Clothes thing because there's a bunch of little boys going, I can see the Emperor's pee-pee, but no one's listening to them, right? But everyone can see, but whatever. So it's all, they're going to pull it, right? And then the debate happens and he shits the bed so bad that it's like, all right, fuck, we can't do this. And it still takes Clooney a month to write that op-ed, right? Or actually, no. It was a month since the fundraiser where allegedly Biden didn't even recognize who George Clooney was, even though he's going to a fundraiser hosted by George Clooney. And he had worked with George Clooney many, many times. And he just was like vacant. And so Clooney writes the op-ed, which he should have written the day after that fundraiser. He writes it a couple of days after the debate. Obama was also at that fundraiser, and in my view, Clooney's acting as Obama's lieutenant here, and they probably chewed the fat for the weeks after the fundraiser, and then once the debate happened, Obama gave the order and said, "All right, do this," because like George Clooney's not an important person in U.S. politics. I don't give a fuck if his wife is a human rights activist. It's George Clooney. Like he's tequila bro. And the idea that the New York Times is even going to publish an op-ed from him, you know, without anyone else saying, hey, print this, i.e., Obama, is not really that believable. Now, we could argue that, and there's plenty of people who are like, of course they would print it. But like the New York Times editorial board doesn't print political, political stuff from rando actors, right? That's just not the normal course of events. So if it happens, you better believe that more than one person called up someone whose last name is Sulzberger, and then the meeting was had and they all proofread it, and then here we are. Because, and I will now posit my ace in the hole theory. Everybody knew Biden was mentally deficient. He was getting worse. He wasn't of sound mind enough to be president when he was elected, but he wasn't the shit show that he had become in 23 and 24 when they literally had to hide him from his own cabinet. Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, although I've said many times my theory is that he has vascular dementia, but also a progressive disease. I think that they were literally in 24, they got an indication that the prostate cancer was not trivial, and they thought of it as the ace in the hole. And they, at this point, I'm talking about is, for whatever reason, Jill, Hunter et al. Hunter wanted his pardon. He did not want his dad to step down. He wanted his dad to carry Kamala over the line as VP and then last as long as possible. And after dragging, the unelectable one across the finish line, turn it over, or more likely force her out, select a new VP by reverse auction with the DNC, and do what the Bidens do best, which is grift. And that's my theory. And that the debate interceded. Kamala won the power struggle. And how do you think she did that after being treated, very poorly? I think it's very simple. She went into the office and said, listen, Hunter, you junkie fuck, I am the candidate, or I spill everything right fucking now. That's what I think happened. That's my theory. And that, the ace in the hole with the cancer was going to be get him elected, and then, oh my God, the president has prostate cancer, blah, blah, blah. And they fucked it up because in the midst of managing all this stuff, they're underqualified, and I'm not even saying medically underqualified, but like a GP is not qualified to be every specialist, right? The GP's got to be working with specialists. And frankly, I've heard enough that seems true that I think 5 urologists would have a lot to argue about with this case, in the absence of an actual multiple biopsies, because, biopsies can miss the target.
Sure.
And you can, in very, very often, especially with prostate cancer, like people wind up having a higher grade than you think. And, wherever the needle passes are the cells you get. And it's just not that, it's not a
Right.
one and done. So anyway, I think that, they were probably thinking, and were probably told by the doctor that, oh, well, prostate cancer is very manageable. And they were thinking, well, if his mental health declines to the point where this thing isn't just even workable anymore, we'll take him, we'll bow out with the prostate cancer excuse. We'll never fess to the mental decline. We'll keep bullshitting everybody. But to me, they didn't want to turn it over to Kamala. And if they didn't want to turn it over to her, I think that they were going to force her out as VP somehow and then get their ultimate payday. And in the end, all Hunter got was a pardon. The problem is now, I think it's challengeable that when a president, when you got four cabinet secretaries, I think, frankly, you can break the journalistic wall. You can force Tapper to testify. You can then show that the fucking presidency was usurped. Those pardons aren't valid. They weren't signed by the president. They were signed by an auto pen run by a cabal of the president's family. That seems pie in the sky, but look, here we are, man.
I don't think that's pie in the sky at all. As a matter of fact, yeah, no. What I'm going to tell you right now is like you and I talked about this, and I think it was very obvious, and I don't think anybody really missed this. But you have the release of the partial release of the Michael Hurt tapes, right? Interviews
right.
That hits last week.
Huge,
then we
huge.
have.
Yep.
And yeah, which is immense, right? We're just setting all this up. So I'm looking at it like, okay, we got two factions. We got the people who wanted to undo the Biden presidency and are making the case in the public square to undo literally the entire thing. And the auto pen. This is why Trump is banging on about the auto pen. And then the Her tapes, and their only recourse at that point is, okay, let's elicit sympathy for Joe because he's got prostate cancer and he was such a good servant to the United States. And this is the thing that's really interesting, and is the following, because you and I talked about it the minute all this stuff started happening over last weekend, and then you brought up the point where, like, dude, it's worse than this. It's worse than what even you think, and which is, I think it's all clearly designed to steal time in the Overton window, and it's not. It's far worse than that, because they've just now copped to something even worse than they were hiding his non-compos mentis status. They were hiding that he had prostate cancer and that he should have stepped down, and they tried to run him again, and they denied the DNC the ability to even have fucking primaries.
Right.
I mean, let's really think about all of this and what this really fucking means.
Well, here's the thing. Being charitable in my previous little exposition was that the prostate cancer staging was misjudged, right? I was being charitable there. Now let's just like on to what you just said, just assume that they knew exactly what he had. Like, they had a biopsy. They got accurate, relatively accurate results, and then they did this anyway. That shows a level of venality, that really kind of is better suited to what my conclusion was that the Biden family was keeping Biden in office because they wanted to auction off the vice presidency once they realized there was no way in hell they could sustain him through a second term. They were arrogant enough to think they could win the election, which they were going to lose anyway. But now they can tell the story, that, oh, well, only Biden could have ever beaten Trump. And they're literally, they're out there. They trotted Biden out. I don't know if he went on The View, but somebody went on The View. Like Biden has had media appearances, post election, and like in the last 2 weeks.
Wow.
So,
no, I missed that.
Like, this is, but my point is just like, I'm just kind of saying, like, what you're saying is even more, I think probably even more likely than the charitable case I was laying out. But I do think they were going to auction off the vice president's spot because that keeps them in control over who becomes president. And I think they just didn't like Kamala anyway. And, she rested the candidacy out by, I think, just a brutal power play. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and that makes sense relative to what we saw from Pelosi and everybody else, because they didn't want her as president, as the candidate, because I think everybody was. I mean, honestly, if you go back to July, pre-Butler, Pennsylvania, and you look at their how this all went down, it was clear no one was happy about this, because this was Kamala Harris as the candidate was not part of the script. And then we get into Obama, Davos, all of this, of what they were actually trying to set up for the 2024 election, which was clearly they were intending to steal it again. And that's why they had to activate Thomas Crooks and to try and take out their goal was to take out Trump at that point. Once it became obvious that they couldn't lawfare Trump out of existence, that they couldn't get rid of him in any other way, that then they had to go to effectively
Well, they
Plan
tried
R.
twice. They tried twice, that we know of. They tried twice.
Yes,
Um,
and I'm invoking Plan R because it's a Doctor Strangelove moment. This is apocalyptic for the world politically, because if the United States gets usurped again by a foreign junta, with another 4 years of the Democrats just basically covering up everything they've ever done while they virtue signal their sagging tits off about what we're supposed to believe, is this insane. I'm like,
I
and
don't think that's going to happen. I think the media has. I think this is the coup de grace. They can trot out Bagala on NPR, which nobody listens to, and have him say that, oh, I don't think we've lost any credibility. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Okay, whatever, forehead. Even Joe Scarborough has been forced to admit that he's, made a fool of himself. I mean, but Tapper was very contrite and you can say, oh, he just wants to sell his book. I got news for you. Tapper makes plenty of money. Like, this book will sell very well, but like, what he's going to make from this book is not what he makes every year from NBC. Like, he's old enough guy that he's got plenty of money. I think Tapper wants to restore some credibility that he knows he's lost, and he seems fairly willing to admit that. So great, but I'm more concerned about the level of coordination between the media and the Biden White House slash family junta, because what we've witnessed is, I mean, I think it's not just provable, but we now have enough people with quote confidential sources who are now coming out and saying on the record that they have them, that we can draw the actual lines of control. Like, let's not forget, like, again, I think we should put the Megyn Kelly interview link in the show notes, because I would encourage people to listen between the lines. Like, yes, she drags him around pretty hard, but the interesting stuff is in between the lines. Like, when you start realizing, oh, this shit's on the record somewhere, and they're going to claim, oh, it's journalistic, this, that, the other thing. But he's asserting as fact that people have spoken with him. And when that happens, that means all the people who are witnesses to it now know that some people are talking for attribution, even if it's anonymous attribution. That changes the entire dynamic of the rats on the ship. So don't expect this book to be the last piece. And listen, the circular firing squad's going to start. The most interesting takeaway was that they said that his administration was more liberal, would it otherwise been had Biden actually been in charge. And when you go back, you can trace a lot of things. And then just all the weird, like tranny and gay stuff that Jen Psaki was putting out, like this, the stupid intern with the, long nails, that he was male, but gay male, like all that stuff was just it's a little too silly. Like, no one was in charge, right? It had become like this just house of fools. And when you think about that, you're just like, okay, so if the first lady's chief of staff, now let's be clear, the first lady's not a political position in the United States. The first spouse, I guess, maybe in the future, God forbid. But like, there's no, you don't have security clearance. You're not in charge of anything. You host dinners. You perseverate over China patterns. That's your job. Sorry, Hillary. But as Hillary has shown us, like, there's a version of reality where people think the first lady matters. And in this White House, she very much mattered because she was probably the acting president. And so we do have a question of, like, what were the policies and who was making them, and was it Obama's hand through, like, up until the end. He had a lot of influence, but then it's pretty clear that what happened is the Anita Brown, the Valerie Jarrett's, the Anita Dunn got sidelined pretty hard, And thus, I think Obama's control over the Biden White House was sidelined. And what happened at some point, probably in late 23, is that the Biden family took over in earnest. And Ron Klain was a part, I don't remember when he stepped down, but there was clearly a power change. And it became more about defending Biden than doing anything else. But the thing I was going to say about the media is, just like we learned that parts of the media were parts of the government were directing social media companies to censor people because of their political views, even during the Trump administration, right? Like that was going on while Trump was president in departments he couldn't control. And that was a legacy of what had happened, when he was running in 2016. It was then put in supercharged, during Biden's administration. And only recently have those of us in the, alternative media, if you will, even breathed a sigh of relief. Like this stuff is, the Biden administration was at war with the First Amendment. How do we get, and these conspiracies between that administration and the media we have today and covering up his mental decline are not trivial, and they're provable. And to me, there's an antitrust issue here. Like, these guys have put it all on the line. They are not journalists. I think journalism is important, but extinct. And I hope that we get back to it. But journalism should live as a counterweight to tyranny, right? When we're in this dangerous moment where the mainstream broadcast channels, I'm saying broadcast for a reason, have been proven to be nothing but advocates and defensemen for one political party in this country, to the point where their own eyes don't work anymore, at least if we're going to believe the testimony of the last week. But the point is broadcast licenses are revocable. And even if it's the cable affiliates of those broadcast licensees doing the dirty work, there's still an antitrust issue here. And that's because they're using their broadcast power and the alleged objectivity that they have, right? And their goodwill to promote this captured sub-entity, i.e. like MSNBC, whereas NBC is the broadcast licensee. So that's basically an undisclosed perpetual campaign donation, right? That is a complete violation of the standards for broadcast. People are like, well, they can't take them off cable. It's au contraire. If they yank CBS, ABC, and NBC's terrestrial broadcast licenses because of what they have done, that is provable. Tell me what the value of MSNBC is, as an independent entity. I got news for you. It's like, it's like Al Gore's network at that point. And I mean, I would argue that's what it is now, but my point is that, they're using cable subscription fees across state lines to do basically what they've been accused of doing with Act Blue, which is you can't buy the kind of coverage that they give for free to the Democrats. So let's just assume they're not getting it for free. There's a quid pro quo. Every Democratic congressman who's ever sat on any of these committees, is sitting there doing their bidding because they know they have to keep these people fat and happy. I want to imagine that on deck, is prosecution of these companies. They literally went to war against the First Amendment.
Yeah. No, you're laying out is, again, downstream of all of these little things that we started this podcast a little slow, I think on purpose, just to kind of lay the background out of what the situation is. But this is the culmination of, now decades of perfidy and malfeasance on parts of these people. And now they're caught like desperately. And it's obvious. And this is where we have to watch carefully how Trump and company play this, because they're clearly laying out a case here to do much of what you're talking about. And,
I hope so. I'm not convinced, but
Well, I get no. What I mean by that is let's not kid ourselves. This is where we in the alternative media space have to really sit down, dig into the details on these things, and make this case clearly. And that's our job. That's our job as journalists. If we're going to
I'm
act
not.
like if,
Don't call me that. Fuck you, man.
I know because it's an insult, but because I don't see
No,
myself as
but
a
we're not
journalist either.
journalists.
We're not. We're
We're
not
opinion people. But
exactly.
and let's talk about for this. Like I think journalism's important and gone.
I
Like
agree.
we have to the legacy. Media is all I will call them. They are not journalists. They do
Right.
not do the journalism.
Mm-hmm. And
And
therefore shouldn't have the protection of journalists.
right. And I mean, here's the thing. Like let's talk about the fact that the Fourth Estate, and the Ivy League, more to the point, they've all been hopelessly corrupted.
Right.
They've and it's happened in stages, but they want to live in a cordon sanitaire. They want to live in their safe space where they can't be challenged, which
Mm-hmm.
is what all intellectually strong people desire. Ha ha. But the point is no matter how smart or dumb you are, like once you stop accepting any challenges, this doesn't make you smarter. Even if your ideas are objectively better, which I'm not saying they are, but
Mm-hmm.
when you start refusing debate or worse, precluding the possibility of debate, this never makes you stronger. It makes you dumber and it makes you more susceptible to dumb ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And, the American media and the Ivy League, where our quote intellectual ideas come from, are both like just mired in this. It's a
Mm-hmm.
major systemic problem that's been frankly endemic in American intellectual life since somewhere between like when Alan Bloom published The Closing of the American Mind, which was like 86 or 7,
Mm-hmm.
and The Fall of the New Yorker in 1992 when the Whore of Babylon took over as editor. Oh, excuse me, fact check, Tina Brown. Um,
Been
you
waiting
know,
for
so
that one for a long time, dude.
I just think people need to understand that it's
Yeah,
not just it's a serious thing. Like I don't
it
care
is.
about Tina Brown. Just she scatified Vanity Fair, then she jumped to the New Yorker, and then she wound up someplace more suited to her, Miramax with Weinstein brothers. But I'm not trying to get sidelined on her. She's not worth the time. But I'm talking about once a thing is changed. In other words, the
Mm-hmm.
American intellectual spaces that were changed in the 80s and 90s, the culture is gutted and there's no turning back without a conscious restoration, and not to harp too much on limeys qua limeys, but the point is that warts and all, American intellectualism was a real thing. It was unique to us. It was our thing. And
Right.
then, frankly, market forces aligned that allowed foreign media conglomerates to erase that unique American voice from our magazines, from our, even our universities, right? Like it took the death of the older history PhDs to really open the floodgates of bullshit in the social sciences, because it was that like hardcore history department like sensibility that kept the institutions kind of in some semblance of rationality. Once
Right.
those guys died off and were replaced with all these little Marxists, like it was Katie barred the door, because the feminists were not, they couldn't do this to the universities by taking over the fucking English departments. That's not how it happened.
Right.
Right. And so
Right.
in the idea space, in the magazine space, like we lost our voice. It turned into this melange of Anglo-Euro trash drivel. And was this the long game of the British Marxist elite using, their useful idiots? Maybe, but probably not. It's probably just a vacuum that was created by, these market forces. And then, the race to the bottom begins. Cue Rupert Murdoch,
Right.
and so the long march through the media, which was echoed by the long march through through tenure in the universities, um, just leads to this any intellectual bullshit that we live in today. And like, I really do believe that, the era of the Moynahans and the, Ronald Reagan calling up Tip O'Neill, it wasn't that long ago. Like,
Right.
there's enough of us alive who saw it, and we need to remember that,
Mm-hmm.
because we need to destroy the American media as it exists today completely. Um, and we need to eradicate foreign influence and ownership. I'm talking about Fox too. Like all of them need to die.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to, you know, we need to have the First Amendment be the only thing that matters.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. No, it's very clear.
you know,
No, it's very obvious. And this has been a long running theme of ours for a long time, and it's been, you know, I'm every time we have this conversation, I keep flashing back to when you called me up one time and we were chatting, and he said, and you just looked at me and you said, did you see the news that the AP bought UPI? And I just like went to back in the early '90s or whatever, and I'm like, uh huh. And I was not. There was a time, folks, when I was not politically savvy at all, and but Dexter always has been, and he's and then you went on for like probably 20 minutes to like remind me just how important this is. You were worried about the conglomeration of media and news feeds and everything else, you know, basically the entire time I've known you.
yeah, well,
And I
if
think
there's not dynamic tension, there's no
right,
work being done, right? Like if there's
exactly.
just one wire service, it's over. And that was
Right.
kind of my point.
Yeah, no,
I,
you were right then, and it took me about another 10 years to realize it during the Gulf War, the first not the during the Iraq War when I was watching I finally started watching the media differently, and I realized that Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State at that point in time, whatever came out of her mouth was the only thing that was repeated ad nauseum everywhere else on all the media. And I'm like, oh, we don't have journalism anymore. We have, of course, stenographers. That was my moment. It was back in 2003 or something like that.
right.
But just to give you an idea, folks, this is why this is we've been cynical about this shit for most of our adult lives, and because I can remember every time you bring this up, I can remember the way American politics used to operate, even back during the '80s. And there was divisions back then, but they were at least cordial. There were there were two or three or four. There's a plurality of perspectives, and then eventually you know, we make a decision, right or wrong. We're not doing that now. Now it's every day is opposite day in Trump's new America, and that makes them very predictable. It makes them very easy to figure out, and our heuristics on how they're going to react into the future. This is why I'll be honest with you. This is why we're good at this. It's because they've become so easy to figure out. And one last thing, and then I'll turn it back over. I remember another conversation you and I had about these very things, and was talking about, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I think, when we were talking about Syria, Putin's move into Syria, and I kept talking about how Putin was making these immense geopolitical moves that were consequential, and he just looked at me and said, "Yeah, but it's not like Putin's a genius. He's just fighting against mental midgets. These are people who are these are the third stringers. These, in hockey speak, you're fighting against AHLers here, and you're not fighting as professionals." And like, okay, fair enough. And I remember that conversation because I've always kept it in the back of my mind when I go and I look at how the world operates geopolitically, and it's helped me temper some of my positions on these things. And it's important. It really is important for us to continue to have those kinds of conversations on a regular basis, and to temper our expectations.
My governing principle is that water rolls downhill, and like if somebody digs a ditch, it's going to get filled. Like it's not
Right.
everything's not like a giant pushing of a boulder up a mountain. Like gravity
Mm-hmm.
is always in play, and gravity is playing the role of entropy in this model. Like we might have the best technology, and the Russians might have far inferior not just technology but service cores. Like they just don't have people taking care of their shit, so when they deploy it, it fails. It's a better, rougher design, which means it's more durable in general, but when it needs maintenance, it's a disaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you put that against the US, which has no objective, you know, and
Right.
like it doesn't matter how many toys and service cores you have if you have leaders who don't know what the fuck they want to do, and that's
Or you have traders in the case of Obama, or to trade
right,
leaders
right,
in the
right.
case of Obama who are actively trying to
Of
destroy the
course,
country.
of
Right.
course, but I'm talking just in every engagement the U.S. has with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Our biggest deficit is always just not having a goddamn goal,
Right.
and
which is why it's very interesting, and this is what I've been cautioning a lot of people about across a number of different idioms, be it Bitcoin or the bond market or geopolitics, whatever. Which is that y'all have gotten really used to in the United States that doesn't fight for its own interests. You've gotten used to a Federal Reserve that's not going to fight for itself. You've gotten used to a banking system that's been wholly captured by globalist forces. You don't know what it looks like when we finally turn that corner.
We've never seen also a United States of America unleashed without a lot of British influence. And the possibility of that moment is coming, specifically on the southern border. I hope, it's measured but incredibly strong. But I worry that, we could lose the script down there in a way that,
of course.
But I think that moment is coming. One other thing I want to say about
sure.
Kind of the long march through the institutions, or whatever you want to call it, the long march through the media. Like there's another feedback effect of all this bullshit, which is this pathological American thirst for stardom, right? And that universally always makes everything even dumber. And this fusion of politics and entertainment. So at least the Clintons were hicks from Arkansas. And at least Bill was, right? And he was starstruck, and he really wanted to play his saxophone on SNL. And he really wanted to obviously bang models, or, he had to settle for something less. But, in that era, it was like they were trying to make politicians cool, right? Like they were trying to make politicians into stars. And now, then they switched to Obama, who was like a cast character that they basically cast as a politician. Like he wasn't a star, but he had star quality. And now we're all the way down the, so you have the sort of on the Dem side, these like so-called stars wanting to be Pauls now, like Oprah.
Right.
But let's face it, we got Trump. Trump won because he's, not because of his political speech. He won because of his notoriety and his name recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a dangerous time, right? Like, because we have the media, which was literally fully infiltrated in the 50s, right? And along with a lot of parts of our, by the communists. Sorry,
mm-hmm.
people. And this all persists without a showrunner, right? Like it's a conspiracy after the fact. And so I think it's very dangerous, the level of bullshit. Like why is George Clooney, an important part of the American political story? Like what the fuck, right?
Right.
It's
trying to
obviously I would be remiss not mentioning, Ronald Reagan. But but Reagan at least went on to become governor of, then I don't know if California was the largest state. I think at that point New York was still.
Right.
But this is a dangerous game, I think, for America, because what it does is it obviates understanding of policy, and replaces it with notoriety as like the important factor in getting elected. And this is we really need to figure out how to stop this, and that's not a statement against Trump, but it's not a good look.
No, it's not. And one of the things I really like about what Trump has done, I'll be honest with you, is if you look at the cabinet that he has around him, and clearly the people that he's setting up for, quote unquote, whatever legacy he's going to wind up with. And I think we're one step closer to that this morning with the tax cut bill, the budget reconciliation bill getting through the House, and now moving on to the Senate, which is that, he's not promoting people. These are all people that grew up within, in many ways within government. You have, people like them or not, you have people like Rubio and Vance and Gabbard and, even Kennedy, who I think is compromised to the point where he's probably not electable. But you have a cabinet around him of relatively serious people. And I mean that relatively in comparison to what we've had recently. And you'll note also that with the Democratic Party, and I think this is one of the last points I think we want to make before we close the show, because I know you wanted to make it, which is that you'll notice that no one's talking about, Dwayne Johnson running as a Democratic candidate now. That star power thing is starting to fade because the Democrats don't have anything. And I think this is that moment where clearly we're working in a moment where they're trying to split the GOP and they're trying to split the MAGA movement. And they're trying to cleave off various bits and pieces of it with the budget bill and a variety of other things. And that's another podcast for another day. But I think what's the big thing here, and I don't want you to speak to this, is what you really see happening with the Democratic Party itself. Because these issues that we've discussed today, especially going back to the Biden scenario, really do leave us in a moment which is weird because so here's the big significant one, and I'll tee you up with this one. The Genius bill, the stablecoin bill that went through, Elizabeth Warren was big mad because she got 16 defections on the Democratic side. And only the hardcore, effectively boomers, the Chuck Schumers and the Elizabeth Warrens, who were trying to hold the status quo together, they got trounced. And now the Democrats are in complete disarray. Like David Hogg was VP of the DNC for what, 3 months, right?
So I'm not ready to make any big predictions, but I'll say about forces in play. Like Obama's really vulnerable right now because, frankly, I think it could be shown that Obama was illicitly running the Biden White House. I mean, the two best case scenarios for Obama is that they blame everything on the Bidens from 2021 onward.
Right.
But that's not supported by facts, right? Like there's plenty of people, and there's plenty of people who were in this administration, who are gonna there's a lot, there's again the metaphor of the rats. Once 4 cabinet secretaries have spoken, albeit anonymously, but on the record, like all bets are off, man. Like everybody's gonna call. This is beyond crisis PR. This is about getting the best lawyer you can get.
Yep.
This is about staying out of prison. And so I think you've got Hakeem Jeffries is out there paying lip service to just more and more. He's painted into a corner where he just has to defend the most idiotic stuff. He's obviously Obama's pick for the future. And I think he's kind of fucked. You have the AOC ascendancy, which I think is largely created by people like us. I don't think anybody thinks she's the face of the party. I think all these stories are just assholes. Sorry.
Fair.
It's like nobody believes that she's going to run the party, but everybody wants to write that story because it just tweaks so many people. And look, I'm not above writing that story in the future.
Right. Because I want AOC to be the face of the
no, exactly. Party. But it's like just a fantasy that, sure. And I think Hogg being pushed out is a sense that look, these people denied their party a goddamn primary when a senile guy stepped down. They're like, oh yeah, well, we're just going to put a member of his administration who's clearly been running cover. Like, let's talk about Kamala Harris's future. Zero, because in every version of this, like how can she be governor of California when she's literally been shown to be in a conspiracy to, I hate to break it to Kamala, but the Biden family's best play is to say, oh, well, she was the one running the policy. We were just protecting our papa, and that story can be made to stick, and then she's fucked because then she's like a VP usurper or whatever. So all this stuff remains to be seen, but I do think the Democratic Party is in extreme disarray. I do think, I just don't even want to say it, but Hillary's pretty old, but she doesn't think she's pretty old. I know. The Hydra, it's like more like a starfish. You can cut it into pieces. You get 5 starfish. You cut Hillary in half, you get 2 Hillarys, and they just never stop. But factionally, I do think that Obama's got a lot of damage control to do, and I will just say my ultimate conclusion is that we're going to have to see how it pans out. We obviously this is a subject to be revisited. Ultimately, I think this is my takeaway for our talk today. We must reject the legacy media in total at this moment in time. This is the moment where the coup de grace is laid, because they only serve the interest of power. and never truth. And that makes them incapable of holding the mantle of journalism ever again. They need to be exiled from the kingdom. And this is an important moment. Like, this is not to say that Republicans are right or right-wing media is right. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's the idea that we have this fake neutral media with broadcast licenses who then use their cable affiliates to suck cable fees to destroy the First Amendment. That mechanism must be broken, and it must be broken for principled reasons by stating, you guys, we're in a conspiracy against the people. You have no place here. That's
Yep.
my soapbox dismount.
Yeah, agreed. And it's an excellent one to leave things. But the one last thing I will say is on the point of the Democrats being in disarray. That's exactly what Trump tweeted out this morning after the budget reconciliation bill passed through the House with one vote, 215 to 214. He said the Democrats are in disarray. They're not even fighting. We have them. The Senate, get this done.
Right.
So.
Yeah,
he's using
the SALT tax thing, which I personally wouldn't have liked to have seen go up to 40,000 because it just pays for too much left wing nonsense. But it is what it is, and it scales down for people over a certain level. But it's it's a property tax
right.
rebate bill. It'll be great for Florida real estate. By the way, but Trump. I think the fact that Trump said screw it, give them their 40,000 is a really good indicator of how important this bill is in total and how many pieces of this. I would tell people on a year look back, I bet you a lot of that money doesn't get spent. And the fact is he's now got the operating room to run the first 2 years of his administration without talking to Congress. And as soon as this goes through, Katie bar the door.
Yep, that's what I think as well. And we'll leave it there. Dexter, that was excellent. Thank you for taking the time this morning. We'll revisit some of this stuff again in the near future.
Thanks to all of our subscribers and our listeners. We're only here because you're here. Thanks.
That is absolutely correct. All right. With that said, we're out. You guys take care. Be well. We'll talk soon. Keep your stick on the ice.